Hello Exiles, this is BEG with another PoE video. That's right, PoE 1, bringing it back with the Legacy of Phrecia event coming out, 1 month long event with all new Ascendancies and a revamped endgame. I'm excited to get into some PoE 1 action again, and what better to return to than of course the good old reliable Frostblades. Now, if you've been following my channel for a long time, I'm kind of known for Frostblades Trickster. That's kind of my main build. And unfortunately, Trickster won't be available. However, I think I found a more than suitable replacement in the Surfcaster, another Shadow Ascendancy that is coming out that has a few pretty key, pretty important things on it that can definitely amp up my Frostblades playstyle. The most notable of which is Stormy Seas. 100% of lightning damage converted to cold damage, your cold damage can shock. One of the main components of the Frostblades Trickster is the Yoke of Suffering unique amulet, which allows all of your elemental damage to shock, and now you don't have to get that anymore. You can get big juicy shocks up to 50%, and this does two things. Not only does it replace Yoke and allow you to pretty much forego the most expensive early game upgrade for the first few days of the league, but it opens up your amulet slot and it allows you to use Wrath for flat damage to get a huge damage boost all throughout the game, which will contribute to your freeze. That's huge because this will make freezing bosses, and specifically freezing Pinnacle and then eventually Uber bosses, much easier, which is one of the most difficult things to do with the build, is getting over that last hurdle and getting into Ubers. This will make that a lot easier, potentially. So this is kind of my plan for what I want to do with the Surfcaster. I am going to, for my first Ascendancy, be taking Ghost of the Deep. You're touched by a tormented illegal fisherman, granting 20% damage, 30% attack and cast speed, and 30% movement speed. Obviously, the big draw of this is the 30% movement speed, but of course the attack speed right before we get multi-strike in Act 4 is going to be really great as well, because one of the issues is sometimes if you don't have enough attack speed yet, multi-strike feels kind of weak when you first transition into it. In the past, I've temporarily run haste during the campaign to kind of deal with this. This is a much better option, and the 30% movement speed is going to push us through campaign much quicker. So Ghost of the Deep is going to be number 1, then Stormy Seas, and then I think I'm looking at 2 different Ascendancies here that I'm interested from here. There is Glacial Wave, which basically makes enemies deal less damage by half of your chill effect. As a baseline, chill effect is max 30, so assuming you have enough elemental ailment effect, which the build tends to get a decent amount of, through cluster jewels eventually, and a little bit on the tree early on, you are going to be reducing damage taken by 15% against enemies you chill, which should be pretty much everything, because we're always hitting everything on the screen, because that's pretty much how Frostblades works. Lots of projectiles flying around, and then your enemies chilled by your hits have damage taken increased by chill effect. It's damage taken, so this will stack with shock, so assuming maximum values of both, we'll get 50% shock, 30% extra damage taken by the chill, so that'll be 80% extra damage taken. Really huge multiplier there. Really nice. Basically 50% better than Intimidate if we have max chill effect. So really cool, just a much more powerful Intimidate that also gives us a less damage taken. And the other one I'm looking for is Sea Legs. Sea Legs is going to do a number of things. So first of all, it'll make early gearing easier, so I might actually get this third before Glacial Wave. It'll give 30% cold and lightning resistance, and then it'll make critical strike chance increased by overcapped lightning resist and evasion rating increased by overcapped cold resist. Now, this is potentially going to be very powerful because not only does the resistance make it easier to gear, but once we've reached all of our resistance caps and everything, we can start adding more and get bonuses through that. And this is really nice because you can get a lot of resistances through things like cluster jewels, for instance. But on top of that, one of the things later on I'm planning on potentially replacing Yoke with is crystallized omniscience, and basically going stat stacker in order to get a ton of extra penetration, elemental penetration, and you also get a bunch of all resist. So let me pull that up here. That would be omniscience. There you are. Okay, so going to be looking at this right here. Now this is something you're going to get later, comes from Uber Exarch, but modifiers to attributes instead apply to omniscience. 1% to all elemental resistances per 15 omniscience. Penetrate 1% elemental resistance per 15 omniscience, and then it reduces, or attribute requirements can be satisfied by 15 to 25% of omniscience. So what this allows us to do is take the resistance rolls off of, all of our gear, start replacing it with attributes instead. And of course you try to get some percent attributes. And in doing so, you can get really high numbers of elemental penetration, which is very good for the build. But also the all resist can potentially synergize with the sea legs if you can get it high enough. So that could be really, really huge. Another thing to consider is Brine Bound here, which 50% chance to freeze enemies for 1 second when they hit you. Not really relevant. We're probably going evasion block hybrid, so not going to be hit barely ever. So that will be largely irrelevant, but enemies you freeze remain frozen for at least 1 second. I believe the normal, if I recall, freeze duration baseline is 0.33 seconds or something like that, or 0.34, more than a third of a second. And so this basically triples that, which means we should have to build less freeze duration to get significant freezes off. And if we do build a good amount of freeze duration, then it will be more impactful as well. So like, for instance, I get freeze duration on jewels a lot of times. This one has 16% freeze duration. This is an example of one of my more recent versions of the Frostblade Trickster, but not my most recent. Just I pulled up one of my many setups I have here. But freeze duration's pretty common thing to get. You used to be able to get it via a mastery, but I believe that's no longer available. A lot of the times what I would do is I would simply anoint Breath of Rime for my anointment for a 50% increased duration of cold ailments. And I think that pretty much would cover it. However, now we should need less, and we should be able to cover it strictly with jewels even pretty early on before the damage is high enough to do so, making it much easier to get into Uber bosses and whatnot. So interesting little idea there. On top of that, we have some other potential things we can get. So for instance, we can do an All's Uprising and get one where with like Grace, no reservation of Grace, to get a free aura. So we can get like Grace, Wrath, some Heralds, potentially, some other good stuff like that. Even potentially adding haste into the build that might not otherwise have it. So there's some potential there. We could also put in Purity of Elements as an extra one to become immune to elemental ailments, which would be great, especially now that we do not any longer have the one step ahead, which would give us freeze immunity before, not allowing us to have our action speed modified below 108%. So freeze immunity is something that is going to have to be solved for. Purity of Elements being added in would be one way to deal with that, and would also synergize with Sea Legs, because additionally we could get a bunch of extra evasion and critical strike chance for all of the extra resistances we have. So that's another potential option. There is a couple of other ones I was looking at. Ashes of the Stars could be a potential take as well. And then there is going to be the Pandemonious is another potential one, which gives a bunch of cold damage. And then will also blind chilled enemies on hit and give 20% penetration against chilled enemies. Penetration is quite good. And another option I was thinking on. See, this is Yoke of Suffering, what we would traditionally be using specifically for this line. Other stuff on this is definitely good, but now that we have other options, there's Fury Valve for clearing is one of the options as well, and even potentially the Anvil for some more block chance could be something we could consider. Although, reduced attack and cast speed, that kind of gets made up for by the first Ascendancy we're going to take. And Marlene, here we are, these other two. Fury Valve for clear, which gives additional projectiles and makes your projectiles fork. This could drastically increase clear speed potentially. And then Marlene's Fallacy. So crit chance, getting 100% crit chance isn't super hard with a Claw because Claw's base crit chance is very high generally. You have something like this, 9.59 base critical strike chance. Can get even higher than that potentially, but you can get quite a lot. And you're also picking up a lot of base crit from Nightblade as well. You get some base crit chance from Nightblade on top of that. So it's quite easy to achieve a decent amount of critical strike chance. And with that in mind, you could potentially sacrifice some of that for Marlene's Fallacy to gain a very massive 210 to 240% critical strike multiplier. For reference, this character's critical strike multiplier is going to be something like 774%, and that's with a significant amount of investment into double and triple critical strike multi-jewels. So you would actually be able to, even with all of that investment, I think kind of as a baseline without really good jewels, you'd probably be getting like 50% more critical strike multiplier, which is really, really big. And this can be further pushed with catalysts, which can increase this by 20%. So if you get a top end one, put crit catalysts on there, you get another 48 on top of that. So you could look at up to 298 crit multi on this thing. Very powerful. And you get Culling Strike out of that as well. And the drawback is 40% less critical strike chance. But with Sea Legs, if you can get high enough overcapped lightning, on top of just already having very high crit chance, we could still get pretty close to, if not 100% crit chance again, even with that in mind. So really cool option there as well. So lots of potential replacements, and all of that is pretty much enabled by Stormy Seas. This is going to be, I think, the best for Frostblades. I looked through all of the other Ascendancies. There were a couple of other ones that I thought might be suitable, but I think this one's definitely going to be the one. I thought Behemoth could be kind of fun. However, there would be some like auras and stuff. I believe certain things count as spells, and this doesn't allow you to use spells because of Rampager. But all the fun Fortify stuff and Rage stuff could be really nice potentially with that. I think there's a decent option there. There were some other ones. I think some of the Ranger ones looked quite good potentially for this. Yeah. Like there's some shrine stacking stuff you could do here. I don't know if that's necessarily what you would want to be doing. There's potentially some interesting stuff on the Whisperer, just because you get a bunch of minimum frenzy and power charges, which could be very strong. And you also have like projectiles from attacks fork. Projectiles from attacks can fork an additional time. That's some pretty crazy clear speed stuff. Increase in reductions to spell damage also apply to attacks at 150% of their value. We could potentially get some value out of that as well. So yeah, there's some options. 10 rage after spending 200 mana. We go through 200 mana pretty quick on this build, so that's also, something potentially to be done. I think, oh yeah, there's some aspect stuff too. Like you can get essentially Feral's Fur here with the cat stealth, and then you give up to maximum number of frenzy and power charges when you gain cat stealth. This seems more of like a flicker strike type thing, but yeah, there's other options, but Surfcaster definitely seems to be the way to go. and that is what I am going to be starting based on, you know, everything I have. The Gambler looks cool too, by the way. So yeah, that's my plan. Hope you enjoyed. Just a short little video going over my plans and kind of talking about things a little bit. I guess I can link my POB, even though it probably won't be particularly relevant. But if you want to get a baseline of the skill tree, actually, I have my old like leveling POB here, which also has a bunch of tips in the notes that are probably not relevant, but some of it will be. This is all quite, you know, out of date at this point. It's been a long time since I've actually updated this build. Update it here, but I'll just go ahead and throw that in the description if you want to take a look at kind of the general idea of the skill trees. You know, it has the full progression tree early on, so you can kind of see. It's got all the different tabs. It's got the notes. This is something I'd worked on quite a bit, so you can get kind of a step-by-step. I believe some of the sockets will no longer be relevant. For instance, the totems don't exist anymore, so you can't have Ancestral War Chief and Protector anymore. But it'll give you a basic outline until I understand the build more, because there are probably going to be some minor changes I'll have to make it work for the Surfcaster rather than the Trickster. Shouldn't be anything too major though. This has been Ryan from Behind Eyes Gaming, and I'll see you next time. Bye.